Awesome. We're live.
We are live.
Awesome. Well, I'm really, really excited to have this discussion. Today, we're talking about leveraging security awareness and training in your insurance plan. And I'm super excited. We have Wes Spencer with FifthWall. Wes, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Tiffany, thanks for letting us join. This is going to be fun today. If you don't know me, my name is Wes Spencer, and I am a cybersecurity guy. I have been for a long time. I was one of the co-founders at Perch Security, and now I am at FifthWall, and I'm the vice president and channel chief. So we're just building our MSP and channel program around cyber insurance, Tiffany.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I'm super excited to have you here. We met at IT by Design's conference, Build It Live, where we talked about the cybersecurity matrix and we talked about, how do we sort of help vendor cybersecurity MSPs and other experts pick vendors and know where to put them. And so we had a great conversation then, and I wanted us to talk a little bit more about almost demystifying insurance and security training. And they talk about all the time that you need it, but why? And before we jump into that, I just want to share a little bit more about myself. So I'm the founder and CEO here at HacWare. Spent my career in cybersecurity over 15 years, worked with the Department of Defense. I used to work as an ethical hacker, but what I do now is focus on security awareness and researching how do cyber criminals target individuals and employees, and how do we change those risky behaviors. I do that now with HacWare and with our platform. We help companies make it easy to provide personalized phishing simulations that are straight to the point and effective. You can set it and forget it, or you can take control, but it's an AI-driven security awareness training platform. And so today we're going to talk about how do you use security awareness to leverage to reduce your cyber risk. And so I think the first question I want to talk about is, why do MSPs, why do managed service providers, solution providers need cybersecurity insurance? And then, so Wes, that's going to be for you. And then I'll talk to you about the security awareness piece. So why do you think
Sure.
MSPs need cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we all know we're finally at this era, Tiffany, where like MSPs know that the cost of a cyber attack. They know it's $1 million plus in many cases. I think we have some study data we'll talk about later that's, closer to 4. And we see this all the time. There's so many things that have cost that add to the cost, right? It's not just paying a ransom or not paying a ransom. It's all of the data disclosure laws that exist. It's incident response that exists. It's all of the credit monitoring and notification. I mean, it's just the lawyers. We all love lawyers, right? All of these things expand and expound. And so as an MSP, what we think about is, okay, well, that's an area of risk I can mitigate and do some things to reduce the occurrence. But at some point, a breach is going to happen. It's going to happen for all of us. And so insurance is a way to sort of transfer some risk away by saying, if we do these certain things to make sure that we're doing the best practice, then we have insurance that's going to cover us when one of those incidents happen. And we can talk about this more in a little bit, but there's that 2 components to it. The first component, of course, is insuring yourself. This is what we call tech E&O, errors and omissions. And this is where you as an MSP need to make sure that you have coverage should something happen that is at fault on your own. So for example, maybe one of your own employees, Tiffany, clicks on a phishing email, and that lets a bad guy in, and they get access to your RMM, like a ConnectWise Automate or a Datto or something like that. And then they run ransomware to all your clients. Your client policies aren't going to cover that. They're going to come after you. So that tech E&O is an important piece. And then for your clients, they also likewise need a cyber policy, because we know how many breaches occur from clicking on phishing emails, from visiting websites, things that clients do all on their own that cause the breach to occur. And so that's why it's so important for us. I think it's far too risky to not have insurance coverage this day and age.
That is 100% spot on. I've seen how a relationship between a MSP and their customer can go sour real fast when a breach happens. And so now that customer who, loved their MSP is now super upset and want to sue them. And so that's where, that cyber risk, that cybersecurity insurance, that cyber liability insurance is super important. But in order to even, get there, to get the insurance plan for the MSP and then also for the small business, they're requiring these companies to have some things in place for them to reduce their risk. These insurance companies want to make sure that they're not exposing themselves to bigger payouts and bigger claims. And so they're needing these companies to have, cybersecurity awareness. They need them to have, data recovery solutions in place and multi-factor authentications. And so what I've seen, just based on how the attacks are happening and they're getting so much more expensive, is that these insurance companies are saying, hey, MSPs, we know you need insurance coverage, but in order for us to give it to you or to reduce our risk, we need you to improve your cyber posture by having security awareness training for your MSP and for the companies that you're supporting. And we also have seen that MSPs are cybersecurity. They're part of the chain. So they're a supply chain risk. And so cyber criminals are targeting these MSPs because they know that they can get access to dozens to hundreds of businesses by just going to that one point of that one entity. And so this is why cybersecurity insurance is super important for MSPs.
Yep, it sure is. And Tiffany, I wanted to give a bit of a picture into like what's happened over the past year or two, because I think this will really help make a lot of sense for us. So one of the things that we've seen is in the insurance world, one of the most important metrics is this idea of a loss ratio. A loss ratio is, when we're looking through, when we're offering policies, we really want to keep the ratio of losses towards gains really low. And typically that loss ratio is 10 to 15% is like a good rule of thumb for like fire insurance, hazard insurance, all of these kinds of things. Well, wouldn't you know, we've seen over the past 3 years, loss ratios between 60% and over 100% in cybersecurity, which is crazy to me, right? So you have all of these carriers that are thinking initially, well, cyber insurance is like stealing candy from a baby. This is easy, right? We'll just give all this out. It should be no problem. We're not going to see a lot of hacks, especially for small and mid-sized companies. No big deal, right? So if you've got a business, we'll give you insurance. We don't really care. And of course, what we've seen is all through 2019, 2020 especially, this huge ramp up of successful cyber attacks. And unfortunately, insurance, they're in it for profit. They're not nonprofits. And so they've been paying out and paying out and paying out to the tune of billions of dollars, and have recognized we made a huge, colossal mistake. And all of a sudden, what we thought was an easy thing to offer has become extremely expensive. And so fast forward to today, from last year to, well, I really should say 2020 to 2021, because we haven't closed this year, so we don't know the data yet. But from the year before to last year, premiums went up from like $1.6 billion up to about $3 billion. In other words, the cost to get insurance has almost doubled. So what you've seen that the carriers do, Tiffany, is they're like, wait a second, this was so risky for us. We took a huge wash. We're going to just double the cost to get insurance. So now if you want coverage, it's going to cost you a whole lot more than it cost you before. And this is right to your point, Tiffany, is they're coming in saying, we've got to reanalyze things. And what we've done before is not good enough. And we're going to have to require you, in order to be eligible. It's like going to a theme park, right? You must be this tall to ride. And you remember how that is when you're a little kid and you walk up and you just didn't hit the green and you're super sad. Well, that's insurance now. You got to be this tall to ride because they want to make sure that you're a coverable risk for them.
That is super, super interesting to hear. And I also, is it still when we think about the incidents that cybersecurity insurers have paid, I saw that ransomware and Vex scams are the top two cybersecurity incidents that insurance companies are paying out. And so you talked about how they thought it was an easy thing to offer, but now it's becoming really expensive. Is it due to those incidents, or what incidents do you think are the cause for some of these breaches?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you open a policy, and they can be confusing, right? I would definitely encourage anyone to not like go on your own when it comes to like looking at a policy, because you really want to make sure you understand like there's all sorts of different line items and things that go into a good cyber policy. For example, I'll give you one. It's not as common this day and age, but we do have coverage for it, is what's called cryptojacking. So that's where like a threat actor gets access to your computers. Instead of running ransomware, they do crypto mining, which I know sounds crazy. But we do see that on occasion. And, you see some cost to that for the removal and the forensics to make sure it was only cryptojacking, the recovery costs, some of the energy costs that went into it. That's just one example. But really, those are the two major threats, is ransomware and business email compromise. Those are the two major ones. And what's crazy is both of those have compounded costs that come with them. It's not, we were talking about this earlier, it's not just paying the ransom. It's not just recovering money from what was wired out. There are things that come in from breach notification services and having breach coaches along the way, to the payment notifications, the credit monitoring that goes into it, the restoration services, the lost business revenue that comes in. There are so many other things that a good cyber policy will have a lot of carve outs for each of those. And you really got to know what's in each of them. Let me just give you one example. One of the most damaging attacks is business email compromise, right? And I think everyone knows what those are. If you don't, it's where an employee opens an email, they think it's legitimate, it's got some wire change instructions, something like that. And ultimately, they're just doing wire fraud. They're trying to trick you into sending money somewhere else. And these are really dangerous and very, 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 very common. And unfortunately, a lot of cyber insurance policies, Tiffany, they have this thing called a sublimit in them. And sometimes they have a very low sublimit. There was a computer store that just recently took travelers into a lawsuit over this. So they had some business email compromise. They actually wired out, get this, $600,000 they wired out to the wrong address. The money was gone, poof, never to return. And they had $1 million in aggregate coverage in their policy. So they thought, oh, we should be okay. No big deal. We've got up to $1 million. We're good. Let's make a claim. And then travelers came back and said, hey, we're going to cover $100K and that's it. And they said, what are you talking about? We have $1 million in aggregate. And travelers came back and said, yeah, you do. But you have this sublimit for social engineering attacks, only $100K. And so they got really angry with that. They took travelers to a lawsuit. And within, I think like a week, the judge threw it out and said, hey, this is clear as day. The sublimit is there. It wasn't hidden. It's very clear. It was disclosed to you. You have $100,000 in coverage for this attack. All the rest of your aggregate limits don't count. So they then lost, Tiffany, $500,000. Isn't that crazy? Just because they didn't understand the policy.
Yeah, I mean, that is crazy. Okay, so now let's talk about one of the things that I always try to tell companies with regard to business email compromise scams is, okay, how do we prepare? How do we prepare? And I think that's what these insurance companies, want when they're thinking about how do we, for a prospective company that they want to insure, do they have the proper cybersecurity posture in place where if a business email compromise scam happens, have they went through the steps of educating? Number one, what is it? Do they know what a business email compromise looks like? Has their employees been tested with a simulation that simulates a business email compromise scam? And so it's all about, I think, just like insurance, you're buying insurance in case something bad happens. And so with security awareness, you have to train your users on when a business email compromise scam could happen, or when a phishing or different social engineering attacks could happen. And the way that we sort of think about it is, we almost think about, we have this phrase of a zero trust in email policy, where you can't trust your contacts because their inbox could have been compromised. And so it's all about making sure that you send a simulation that is impersonating someone in their network, or you have a video training that talks about, what to look out for, what are the tips and tricks that you may see in a business email compromise scam. And we've created like a framework of the 6 categories that you should have in your security awareness training to sort of help you identify the security awareness tricks and what's going on. I think we got a question going on here, but we've created a framework to sort of help you build a security awareness training program that will help you cover business email compromise scams, phishing, vishing, and some of those cryptocurrency lures that you've talked about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, go ahead.
Oh, no, I love that approach. That's the right approach, Tiffany. Like, I've just found so often when we, like, especially my days at Perch, when we would talk with a lot of clients that are going through a breach. And one of the common things they'd say is, I had no idea this could happen. Like, education gap that's there. They didn't know. They didn't know how it looks. They didn't know how it works. And that lack of knowledge leads to, I think, oftentimes really negative, bad outcomes. So I love your approach there, because I think that's right on the money. I was just chatting while you were chatting. Andrew Edstrom in chat had some great comments, just sort of about how you look at the costs, like the capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. And he was sort of expanding on what we were talking about earlier of, the legal PR, digital forensics, reputation costs. I mean, all of that is absolutely in there for sure. And it's interesting, he said you would have spent that anyways, but now it's likely a premium because you need it immediately. So that was interesting. And then let's see, Daniel was saying access, protect, detect, respond, recover. I think so. Daniel was just talking about the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is right on the money too.
Yeah, and majority of these cybersecurity frameworks are built off of NIST, which is it helps you to understand how to formulate a security awareness plan, but just your entire cybersecurity stack. And so a couple things that I always recommend when you're building a security awareness training that is based off of NIST is you need to make sure you're covering categories like how to identify phishing attacks and the different types, passwords, like how do you, create a password, how do you avoid the most common password, and then also the tools that can help you better utilize, improve your password security. So multi-factor authentication and, password managers. What's the best practices to use those? And then the other thing that I always like to talk about with security awareness is we want to make sure that we understand how do we secure our data based on our industry regulations and our state. Like, how do we best make sure that we're not exposing some personal identifiable information? And then who do we give access to, and when do we take it back? And so NIST is a great framework. CIS is another one. And to help you sort of navigate, how do you create training?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a great question from Andrew. How do you elaborate on the importance of role-based security awareness training? Tiffany, you'd probably be best to answer that one.
Yeah, so there's definitely role-based security awareness is important because every department has access to information that's sensitive and important to your organization. And so it's all about tailoring your security awareness based on the role. And I like to use what you're giving to the finance department, and they're dealing with, they're dealing with invoices. They may be dealing with other financial information that's sensitive to that organization. They need to be trained on, how to protect that information, and they're getting targeted. They're one of the departments that's most targeted by cyber criminals because they have access to potentially money. And so the training to them is often frequent. You want to include phishing simulations that's simulating someone asking for an invoice. You want to have training on how to actually protect the data, but it's going to be different from someone who is in potentially IT, who may be creating scripts, or someone engineering, where you want to give them secure coding training. That's a part of security awareness. Like, how do they make sure that when they're building something and they're trying to create automation, that they're not potentially exposing a vulnerability where the cyber criminal could just go to that tool and siphon all the data out that they want. And so you have to make sure that based on the role, that everybody's getting the right training based on their role. And then another thing about behaviors and people just want to know, how do they do their job and do it more securely? And they don't want their time wasted by learning something that has nothing to do with their job. Like, let's stop wasting our time. And so really trying to think about, how do we create, of course, you need to have the generic training, but tailor it to the individual's role. And what we like to do at HacWare is we like to just tailor it to their actual day-to-day work, because what we're finding is that some organizations, when you're talking about the job function of someone who is in HR, it could be different from organization to organization, because a larger HR organization, HR could be divided up into where it's focused on benefits, or it could be someone that's focused on just more on the creating of course content for the organization. A smaller HR department, they're doing everything. And so we try to make sure that the training is based on, what they actually are doing. And we use AI and try to gather information to try to make sure that it's tailored and it's all automated.
And I love that approach. I think it's role-based training is, what's the goal here? The goal is to really address that individual based on what it is that they do. And so, I think, for example, for a lot of managed like MSPs that may be on the call, your bookkeeper is one of the most important people on planet Earth, right? Because they're the ones that get those invoices that come in. They're the ones that reconcile accounts and send out bills and pay bills oftentimes. And so that's one of the entry points for a lot of business email compromise. That isn't it important that that particular employee gets some very customized training around that specific issue and potential vulnerability? And let's not think, oh, well, they're a bookkeeper, so they're not like an IT person, right? So they don't have like domain admin creds to like certain things or access into the RMM, so they're no risk. No, they have a very unique, important responsibility in their role. And so we do want to make sure that we customize that training for them. Vice versa, maybe that IT person who has a lot of controls, we might want to test them uniquely according to the levels of access that they have. And so I think a lot of what that comes down to is what you were talking about, Tiffany, of like, what should that be? How do we design role-specific training based upon the activities of that particular user? And I think that's one of the most valuable things that we can do. And unfortunately, I think a lot of organizations just have really vanilla security awareness training where it's sort of like, well, everyone just gets the same thing. And that's certainly not nearly as unique and helpful as it could. How does HacWare kind of approach that? Do you guys have an approach to like role-based that may be unique to certain like job roles and things like that?
Well, it's basically the way that we try to do it is more individual. It's more based on the individual. And what we try to do is two things. We're trying to first, we're trying to collect and understand, well, what's going on in the threat landscape. So the platform is mining and trying to learn about phishing attacks, lures, and then it also is integrated with the organization. So it's trying to understand if we have a connection into Microsoft 365 or into Google Workspace, then we're trying to learn a little bit more about the individual and how they work within that organization. And then from there, it takes those two pieces of information, and now it knows, okay, it creates a profile. Like, this is what this employee needs to get tested on, then train, and then get tested on again. And so it's almost like two things. It works like how a bad actor does, where they're learning, they're outside the organization, but if there is an opportunity where you have something that they want, or you can be that conduit where they can get to what they want from you, then there's an opportunity where they're learning about the organization, the individuals, and it's all based on public information, LinkedIn information, social media, Twitter information, public and organizational announcements. It's learning from that. Our platform does it as well, where it can create a targeted phishing simulation that's spear phished, it's personalized. And so our platform does that. But now when we talk about the learning experience, so our best teachers are the ones that take the time to learn about us and to understand how what works best for us individually versus what works best for the masses. And so we're trying to become that personalized teacher that continuously learns. And now it's going to try to provide a phishing simulation, a micro learning, and then continue to adapt and evolve over time.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love that approach. Oh, here's a good one. Apologies for you're not hijacking our event, Andrew.
Definitely
This is really what we're doing here to answer your questions. Yeah. But do you all see successful ways to address clickers? We've implemented employee risk policies with the 3 strikes and you're out but have yet to see an organization follow through. That's interesting, isn't it? I have some thoughts, but I want to know what you think first, Tiffany.
So it's based on your company culture. And I think it's best to understand if the company, I have a hard time with this because I really will want those companies who are in industries where they may be in the banking industry. We have some partners who support banks, and their culture is if you 3 strikes, you're out of the organization. And that's just typical across the banking and financial services industry. But I think what's important is that you have to communicate the why. So it's really important to communicate with end users about, why is this important? Why do we have this 3 strikes and you're out rule? Well, because we have access to a lot of financial data. The banking customers or financial sector customers are relying on us to keep their information safe. And so this is a no-nonsense environment. Same thing like if you're dealing with, nation state information. If you may have some customers there, it's like highly important information where they have to have those rules. But for other organizations, we try to tell them there's a couple ways that you can create a culture around security that I feel like is more effective. So, first and foremost, we need to make sure that we first start with the why. We first talk about and show, what does it look like when a failure happens? What does this mean for me as an employee? Does this mean that I'm going to get fired? No, it just means that we want to make sure that we set a roadmap to how you're going to train and get better. And when you communicate that an employee isn't going to get fired, there's a couple things that happen. If a breach or a suspicious email actually happens, they're most likely going to communicate that something happened here. Maybe I clicked on a link and we need to try to shut down the system. I made a mistake. But when you have those environments where it's a coercive environment and the employees are afraid, there's a high probability that if something actually happened, they're not going to say anything.
Yep.
They're going to stay quiet and let someone find out that something bad happened, and oftentimes it's too late. So to make sure that I'm not rambling, let's communicate a strategy of why we're doing this, what's going to happen if, a suspicious email or incident happens, or when we're doing these training exercise, like what is the course of action, the corrective action. And then from there, last and not least, you can create champions where you're doing, where you're incentivizing people for reporting phishing simulations. And then the last thing is, it's always good. I think it's good to have, when you're doing phishing simulations, failures, not from the same people, but that means that you are increasing the level of difficulty of your phishing simulations, where it's not these ones where we're trying to get everybody to pass so they're easy to spot. That's not helping anyone. But now that we see that there's a period where no one is responding, now let's take it up another notch. Let's try something harder. And then we're going to get those failures, which is good. Now we can train them to improve. So that's my thoughts. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's great. I think a few things that come to my mind. One is I ran security awareness training at my bank where I used to work a number of years ago. And I made it a point to actually call every single user that failed. And I want to share one story. Called one lady, she failed. She'd never really failed before. And I call her up. She knew it was me because of the ID. And she goes, Wes, she goes, how are you? Oh, no. She goes, I failed the phishing test, didn't I? I was like, yeah, you did. I said, I just wanted to call and just kind of see what happened there. I was real kind of kind with her. And she's like, you know what? She goes, I was really busy. She said I was in between 2 client meetings. I had a whole stack of emails that had just come in. I was trying to rush through them. And I click, and I saw one that I thought was legitimate. And I just opened it not thinking. And I said, you know what? That's okay. I said, the fact that you recognize that means a lot. That's why we're testing. And she goes, well, it means a lot to me. She goes, I didn't mean to fail. I didn't want to fail. She goes, but this was a great wake-up call for me. I'm like, that's why we're doing this, is a wake-up call. So I say that to say, like, I one thing that can help with those constant clickers is sometimes a phone call can actually go or if they're in the office with you, just stop on by and talk to them. Because I think sometimes that helps extrapolate it's not just this digital thing that we do that we don't care about. A fail means something. And so sometimes that can go a really long way with those constant clickers, is just have a conversation with them. The second thing that I think too, that I would add to this as well, is think about like why they're clicking. You mentioned a little bit of that too, Tiffany, on the why behind it. Like, I understand the 3 strikes, you're out kind of thing, but I would say, let's find out why they had these multiple strikes. Was it because they haven't been like properly trained? Did they come into the organization many years ago and they just don't understand the relevance and the reason why it's so important? Or maybe they're just not technologically proficient. Like, they really lack a lot of just the good technical skills. Maybe it's like they just literally don't care about their job and they're not happy in their job and they just don't care. And I think a lot of times a multiple failure of clicking has a lot of offshoots it has a root cause that comes before it. And so if you do have to let that employee go, I would say it's probably not because they failed a bunch of phishing tests. Maybe it's because they didn't have the aptitude. Maybe it's because they just were really burnt out of their job and really, really unhappy. But usually I think a lot of those things don't necessarily happen. Let's get to the root cause and let's find out why they're having those multiple failures, and let's do what we can to address it. And I think you're right, Tiffany. The carrot is always better than the stick. Mm-hmm. I mean, no one wants to work in those like oppressive cultures where they're just trying to get their job done and then they have this fear over their head. Because you said it best. If you create too much fear, they're not going to want to report an incident. And then you actually have a real one and they don't say anything about it and it gets way worse. So I'm with you. I think we should think through, how can we create incentivizations? Maybe you could have like 12 gift cards a year of like $25-$50 from Amazon. And once a month you pick a user who reported a phish, whether it was one you tested or a real one, and you go brag on them and say, hey, to all your employees, look at this. Awesome. Here's a screenshot of the phish. Here's why it was really scary. Here is the user that did an awesome job reporting it. gift card, and I can't wait to give next month's out to my favorite, right? Like you could do some really cool things like that. What other ideas do you have, Tiffany, about creating a positive culture around testing? Any ideas you
Yeah.
have?
So, great idea. I see when you make it a competition, that is what I've seen has really worked well. Like when, there's almost like a leaderboard. I've seen where companies have said these are the top 5 great individuals that have shown cybersecurity posture. They also have shown the ones who are at the bottom of the stack. And so those who don't want to be in the bottom, they're working to try to make sure that they increase their reporter. So they look at when you have a security awareness tool that allows you to report the simulations, they're looking at that as a metric. So how often are people reporting these attacks? How often have they caught and reported our simulations? And so that allows them to rank the users in almost this leaderboard. I've seen organizations create a security awareness champion. So each department has a security awareness champion. And so on every meeting, maybe it's a weekly meeting, the security awareness champion is saying, maybe they're sharing some news on what has happened that is specific to their department. And so that's sort of a way where they're able to keep security top of mind. It's a small security minute that they're doing. And then they may be doing like little shout out in that meeting of this is the person that I saw, do something well that had to do with security awareness this week. And so those are some of the things that I have seen that has worked well. But it's always just trying to make sure that we have an open dialogue about security. It's not the thing that I see that doesn't work is when you only have this discussion when you hire a new employee. And I've seen them just do a presentation. It's a PowerPoint about why, security awareness is important and what to look for and what not to look for. That doesn't work. The security awareness refresher every year is not enough. And then the whole idea of when I see something that looks suspicious, getting on the chat and saying, hey, everybody, there's an email and make sure you don't click on it. I think we have to just sort of think about ways that we just create ways to make it competitive, but also, little ways that we can keep the conversation going week over week about cybersecurity and the importance of it. But one question that I did have for you, Wes, and I know we're almost at the end, is it was interesting to hear that you work with a bank. And so some of the things that I've heard from some of the banking users that we know is that they have, when a customer or a user is clicking multiple times, they will remove access to the entire system until they take the training and they have talked to them. Have you seen that? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh boy. We fortunately never had to get to that level. But when you think about what a bank does and particular users that have a lot of access to a lot of things, at some point you have to put the company first and say, if you have a situation where an employee is, again, a habitual clicker, like Andrew was talking about, maybe you do have to take some drastic measures to kind of get that through, right? Maybe you do. Now, I will tell you, I was fortunate to not have to do that. And it wasn't so much because of me. It was because we really spent a lot of time educating our users why it mattered. And I remember when I first got to the bank, I made it my mission to really spend a lot of time with my board and my C-level, just to make sure we're on the same page what it would cost our bank. And so we actually ran through like some tabletop scenarios together of like, let's pretend we had a ransomware attack. What things could happen here? And we just sort of game planned it out. And Tiffany, one of the coolest things is my bank president at one point just stopped us in the middle of the discussion. He goes, stop. I'm like, uh-oh, he's probably mad at me. And he goes, I don't think that there's anything more risky to this organization, to our bank, than some kind of cyber attack. And I was like, I can't believe he just said it. After the meeting, I said, could I ask you one thing? He goes, sure. I was like, could you just relay that in an email to all our employees? Next time you do a big employee-wide email, at the very top, would you talk about that? He goes, I can do that, sure. And I'm telling you, Tiffany, that took us so far in terms of buy-in when I had the CEO himself really talk about the importance to our bank, why this matters. It just really took it to a new level of, well, if the CEO cares this much, I guess it really is that big of a deal. And so that was just a big lesson I learned personally of like how far having top executive buy-in can really take your organization. And I would really focus on that. If you're listening to this today and you don't feel like you're there with your executive team, start with that. Start with educating them and just understand it's not going to happen in one conversation. It might take a month. It might take 6 months, but you can get there if you're a great educator and you really spend time on why it's relevant from a risk perspective.
And that's the key thing, especially for MSPs. You brought up a great point. You have to communicate with that decision maker about the why this is important, why your entire team, it's only going to work if you have buy-in and if you understand the why and you can communicate with that team why this is important, because at the beginning, change is going to be hard.
Yes.
At the beginning, security training and trying to change your behaviors to pause and and learn something new, it's going to be hard and it's going to be tough at the beginning. And so having that decision maker to understand why in the table topics is a perfect way to help the decision maker to have that aha moment. And then now that person can communicate company wide while we're going through security awareness training, and it's going to be continuous, and we're going to focus on these different areas, and you're going to get a test, but it's not to make you feel bad. This simulation is really to help you increase and open your eyes to understand what is happening every day. And so I think that is a fantastic learning that you had, but also many MSPs should take that and apply that when they're talking to the companies that they're working with.
I agree. I'm thinking if I'm an MSP today and I step in the role of my clients, especially my business owner clients, they stay up late at night worrying about things. Okay. What they worry about is usually not cybersecurity. They worry about what could stop my business, what could prevent me from being successful. Because a lot of these business owners, they don't have 401ks and all these kind of things. Their business is their livelihood. And so that's what they stay up thinking. So if you can make the connection between the cost of and results of a cyber attack to what keeps them up at night of what could ruin their business, when you can bridge that gap, you then have their ear because you've now stepped into risk management discussions. And that's why I think you're right. This kind of education and what we're doing here around training our users goes part and parcel to all of that, Tiffany. Totally love what you said.
Absolutely. You're right. You got to speak to them in their language. Cybersecurity isn't their language, but dollars and cents is their language.
You nailed it.
So when we can communicate to them on what matters, why this is important, how they can keep their business running by just taking a couple steps on training your end users, getting cybersecurity insurance to manage and mitigate any risk. Now we're talking about things that businesses really care about.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Can we bring Juan's comment up? Juan's a good friend of mine. I love this. I mean, Mr. Wisdom himself, I can just say that. But often education from the bottom up concerns can help move organizations at the top. Each department has risk and require ways to mitigate that risk. Work with the divisions to build out a program that will work for the company, then test. Yeah, so let's get involved in it. Let's really understand that company and who's doing what, and let's make sure it works for them. Because you're right, Juan, if we don't do something like that, then it feels haphazard, it feels vanilla, it feels like it doesn't have any real meaning to the organization. And you're right, test, my friend. If we don't test, what's the point in what we're doing? So really good point. Yep.
One of my favorite people, but he's right. And I think the way that I read this comment is you have to make from the bottoms up. And what I mean is individual. You have to make security awareness training personal. You have to communicate, why do you care as an individual about security and phishing and any social engineering attacks? Like, how could this affect you personally? How could it affect you losing resources and you losing potentially a job if it comes to that. But, it's really about how do we make them understand why this is important to me, and how the learnings. I always communicate how you should talk about this with your family. I've talked to so many people who they're getting educated on security awareness at their company. It's personalized to them. Now they can go home and talk to their young students about what they need to do to keep their information safe. They could talk to their parents about making sure that they're not a target and keeping their information safe. And so when you're creating something to the bottoms up where they understand, then they'll care about how do I protect my company and make sure that the company keeps their information safe. And definitely testing them is super important. Great point, Juan. Awesome.
This is fun, Tiffany.
All right. I think this was fun. I wanted
Yeah.
to, for Security Awareness Month, bring an expert in cybersecurity and insurance on. So, Wes, I really, really am grateful that you came, because this is a thing that I wanted to know as well about insurance, and what does it mean for the business to get it, and what should they look out for? So this was super, super important. I know Britta put something up on the screen, but Wes, any last comments or thoughts?
Yeah, my last comments are just know that from an insurance perspective, it's now become security awareness training and testing of your users is not an option, it's a requirement. So if you've had no other motivator before to start being involved in this for 100% of all your clients, if you're an MSP listening today, now you know why. Every single insurance application now expects it, asks it, and requires it. It's just too important not to, because they're the ones that pay out for the breaches. So they know the source of the breaches, and they're the ones that know at the end of the day, boy, this could have been really helpful in preventing this or limiting the blast radius. And so, this day and age, it's really become a requirement, because if it's, as we've talked about today, just how important it actually is, and the amount of benefit that it can actually have.
Absolutely. I love what you said, the term blast radius. I think I'm going to use that.
Have at it.
But I agree. And then some of the things that we're researching is the carrot. So how cybersecurity insurance is, providing incentives on premiums when you have security awareness training,
Yep.
where it could offset the cost. So we're definitely looking at that, and we're going to put more out about that. But if you want to learn more about our cybersecurity framework, it's in the beginning stages of how you can set your training up, the content that you actually want to take and have in your training plan to get it ready for an insurance review. You can go check that out on our blog. And then we also have this month for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, a whole schedule. We're going to be talking about how to market for your MSPs, how to market cybersecurity awareness, and go to your customers where they are on digital platforms, and how to utilize that. We have a free cybersecurity awareness kit that you can use and you can modify that will help, spread awareness about cybercrime and what we talked about, business email compromise scams. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching this LinkedIn Live, and have a great day and spread love.
Thank you so much, everyone.